By 1984, the Apple III had already been discontinued. In the Wikipedia article for the Apple III, Wozniak estimated that Apple had spent $100 million on the III instead of improving the Apple II and better competing against IBM. Most employees who worked on the III reportedly left Apple. In the Computer Currents article, the interviewer asked, quote, "If you were to start Apple over again, what direction would you take?" End quote. Wozniak answered, quote, "I want to be clear about what direction Apple should have taken. In order to build the company and increase sales, they should have established a production system that was in line with the current situation. From 1980 to 1983, sales of the Apple II exploded, bringing in considerable revenue. However, Apple made no improvements to the Apple II. They should have focused on improving memory. During this time, Apple was solely focused on developing the Apple III. The Apple II is one of the best-selling personal computers in the world. I travel to user groups and clubs abroad to meet as many users as possible, so I know what people were doing in the real world. However, no one at Apple knew what products users could purchase to expand the memory of their Apple II. Surprisingly, there were no 64K Apple II systems available at Apple. The maximum memory available for the Apple II was 48K, and Apple believed that one disk drive was sufficient. Apple's thinking at the time was that if it increased beyond that, it would become the same as the Apple III, and therefore the status quo would be maintained. It was a huge mistake to focus all of Apple's efforts on a single product, the Apple III, that accounted for less than 3% of its overall business. If you do the math, millions of dollars were poured into the Apple III. Think back to the Apple II ads of the time. Every single one of them had the Apple II prominently displayed at the center. However, Apple didn't really care about the huge advertising budget, believing that the Apple III served us as a corporate image. A true corporate image would have emphasized that Apple employees were united in their work on all Apple products. However, at the time they were only allowed to work on the Apple III. Not a single Apple II ad was released in 3 years, and yet the computer became the world's best-selling personal computer without any advertising. Woz continued, "The Apple III excelled at creating spreadsheets. 80% of Apple IIIs were sold for spreadsheets. We built the world's greatest product, perfectly suited for one application: spreadsheets. Spreadsheets were used by Apple employees and were their speciality. So the Apple III was truly impressive collection of technology, but it had one flaw. It wasn't good at anything other than spreadsheets. So Apple put a special chip in the Apple III that blocked unused memory and the 80-column mode when it entered the Apple II emulation mode. This prevented users from thinking that the Apple II and the Apple III could do the same thing. The marketing people wanted to make it clear that the Apple III was a different machine from the Apple II. The III was a 128K machine for business use, whilst the II was a 48K machine for education and hobbyists." End quote.
The Apple II, my Apple II, was all mine, was all of the income of Apple for the first 10 years of the company. What gave Apple the springboard to become what it is now? Okay, it was that product was important. It was bringing in millions of dollars a month. All the revenues of the company, we had just introduced the Macintosh. We had a shareholders meeting. All you heard, Macintosh. They didn't mention the Apple II once.
Steve Wozniak was a pioneer of 20th century integrated circuit design. He knew the best ways to get circuits to work in the most efficient ways. Back in the 70s, he had to do it all by hand. But these days, we have people like today's sponsor, PCB Way, as your one-stop shop to help out with any electronics project. Heck, they even help out with CNC machining and 3D printing too. PCB Way can help with prototyping, and they can even assemble full PCBs for you. They even have a great community of makers on their shared projects website. So, if you want PCBs from just $5, then the way to go is PCB Way. Check them out today at PCBWay.com. Al's Geek Lab thanks PCB Way for their sponsorship. Now let's get back to finding out about Steve Wozniak's PCBs. Woz continued to rant on for quite some time about the Apple III, as well as waxing lyrical about why the Lisa failed. Whilst Wozniak wasn't scathing about the Lisa, he did reflect on Apple's commitment to Apple's attempt to write a new standard in computing with the Lisa. He reflected, quote, "But slow and steady is the safest way to do things. And that's what differentiated the Lisa from the IBM PC," end quote. Woz wasn't a fan of the IBM PC, but after a time he seemingly grew to accept why the PC won the war between the Apple III and the Lisa. On one hand, the Lisa innovated, but it was too much for the market too soon and too expensive. On the other hand, the Apple III wasn't innovative at all. Woz signed off the rant about why the Lisa failed by saying that, quote, "Performance alone isn't what sells a product. Sometimes standardization of a machine is more important than how fast it runs. So standardization is what allows a product to survive in the market for 10 years, end quote. These were interesting insights from Woz, a man not particularly outspoken about things other than technology. He's well known for being an approachable and kind and often humble person about his achievements. Computer Currents asked Woz about how he would organise Apple, and he was clear that he would basically spin off separate companies under the Apple banner, but they would operate completely separately. Quote, "Strange as it may sound, if I were to reorganise Apple, I would separate the Apple II and the Macintosh businesses," end quote. Woz continued to go into some financial-based specificities, where he conceptualized the revenue split between the product offices, 70% to 30%. Despite this, he expressed concerns that the company in their current form were making software products that were not compatible with their other computer lines, citing software that was released for the Apple IIe line which weren't backwards compatible to earlier Apple IIs. Personally, I would imagine that if you splinter hardware divisions, retaining cross-division software compatibility would have become harder, not easier, so I found this claim a bit of a curious one. By the time of the Computer Currents interview in 1985, Steve Wozniak had already pretty much left Apple behind, having sold off most of his Apple stock and started a company called Cloud9. He proclaimed that he had left Apple, saying that his style was not compatible with Apple's. Quote, "My design style didn't suit Apple's organizational structure. Apple's current design philosophy is for someone to create the main components first, and then everyone else divides up the work. My approach, on the other hand, is to control the whole. For example, let's say you design a piece of hardware and write the code, and then you decide you need to make some changes to the hardware. That allows for flexible changes. You can think of the hardware and software as a single entity. If 5 people were to divide up the design of a single piece of hardware, each of them wouldn't know which features to add and which ones to remove. But if you're involved as a whole, deciding let's change this part and that part, then you can make the best decisions. In a large company, however, it's rare for an approach where everyone acts as a leader and works with complete consensus to succeed."
The Wall Street Journal called and they said, and I told them what I was upset about at the shareholders meeting. And they wrote that was why I was leaving. And I said, no, it's not why I'm leaving. I'm leaving to do this new project, a new startup. And they wrote it the other way. And Steve Jobs really believed that I was, against the company, but he didn't have the wherewithal to see that I was still an employee. And it was really funny because after we were building that remote control, we had the plastic pieces. And we went to Frog Design to make the plastics. Frog Design was Apple's big design people that Steve Jobs liked a lot. And I said, you do projects for other companies? Yeah. So we had them design some possible remote control shapes. And then I heard the head of Frog Design talking to my partner Joe Ennis on the phone. And the head of Frog Design told how Steve Jobs came by on his bicycle one day. And the head of Frog Design, Hermit Esslinger or whatever his name was, showed him the remote control and said, look what we're doing for your partner, Steve Wozniak. And Jobs threw it against a wall. He said, put it in a box and ship it to me. I own everything you do. Or Apple owns everything you do. I listened and heard those words. What human being, what decent human being could ever do something that way? You know, I would never bring up a kid to be that way or encourage anyone else to be that kind of a person. That's you run into I don't know, narcissism. I'm in control of everything.
Although it's probably fair to say that Woz didn't really have a grasp for business, for economics, or much outside the tech that he was tinkering with, he built whatever he thought was cool for himself. It just happened that other people thought it was cool too. Quote, I just wanted to design something useful. It was purely a hobby, where I swapped techniques with other hackers and joined clubs. I think it was fate that I ended up with something particularly amazing. When I worked at HP, I would design things I liked at night just for fun, so it's not surprising at all. But it was really unique to have such success so quickly. It was a huge success. I had no idea what a big company meant. When we started, 1 million seemed like a big number to me. It was so big, I couldn't believe it. End quote. The interviewer changed tack and asked Woz about what home computers were good for. Out of that part of the interview, I found this short statement rather informative. Quote, most people would be happy if they could just press a button. So proper technical support is not something that requires 5 people with different goals to work together. The idea is to allow everyone to do their business with the flip of a switch. Such people have little interest in the structure of computers. End quote. Woz is highlighting a key understanding here. Although he was, and still is, someone that understands technology at a deeply low level, he understood that the masses did need a computer just to work. At home, the household computing lineup sounds like it was a mixture of some of Apple's current lineup of computers of the time. It sounds like he was using a Macintosh for his wife's needs and other graphical purposes, an Apple IIc for the stuff on the go, especially when paired with the LCD screen, but principally he was using an Apple IIe for most of his tech stuff. Bear in mind, this was 1985 and the Apple II started its life in 1977. The interviewer then asked about the future of home computing and the market, and after a pause, Woz answered, quote, I think everyone would say the ultimate home computer would probably have a small, simple, rear-lit LCD screen, connect to any TV, control all of your appliances and devices, have a huge amount of memory and a built-in hard drive, and be about the size of a book. End quote. If you think about it, Woz was pretty on point. Laptops started to appear around the end of that decade, rear-lit LCD became something of a mainstay a while later after the price came down to the consumer level, and whilst he probably didn't foresee streaming TV, he did see computers and TVs interacting somehow. I would have loved to have picked his brain on exactly how he expected computers to interact with the TV medium. In 1985, online services like CompuServe were just becoming a thing, but I guess one could extrapolate that you could control all of your home appliances, including your TV, in an online fashion. He got it completely right when he said that computers would have a huge memory and a built-in hard drive. Pretty much all the desktop IBM clone PCs of the time were coming with hard drive options, and the Lisa and the Mac had a hard drive option by 1985, so it was no stretch of the imagination that these would be scaled down in size to fit into a computer the size of a book eventually. He might have even been thinking about something that looked like the Toshiba Libretto, or he might have foreseen something more akin to the iPhone. Amidst all of this fairly interesting and optimistic sounding navel-gazing, he took a more depressing tone after a while, noting that there was a downturn in the computer market and that this is becoming a commodity like a hi-fi instead. Quote, let's say you want to buy a new computer. Your computer may be more functional, but it's probably less exciting than your first computer. You probably won't get used to the new features right away, and yet, newer computers are always selling. It will be interesting to see how successful the Amiga PC is. End quote. I guess he foresaw the rise and the fall of Commodore. Wozniak was disheartened at the computer market around the time of the interview for Computer Currents. His new company, Cloud9, was about as far away from making computers as you could get. Cloud9 was making programmable remote controls to control household devices, and in the future these remote controls might be accessible over some sort of telephone connected service. When Computer Currents asked if the device would be released anytime soon, Woz gave an interesting response that briefly mentioned his mood. Quote, "Yeah, it was a little strange to release a product like this after working at Apple for so long. It's just my mood. But, in reality, I'm thinking of speeding up the development schedule and completing it by the end of this year." End quote. When later asked about how much the device would sell for, Woz was a bit ambiguous, saying it would retail somewhere between $80 and $200. Dangerous to state such a variable cost before finishing the product and evaluating his market. This surely marks some immaturity in Woz's retail capabilities. Later in the article, Woz stated that he deliberately wants to keep his company small, around the $100 million mark. Cloud9 would go on to develop the Core remote control, which used the 6502 CPU at its heart. Unfortunately, the company was not really meant to be, the company closing its doors after only 3 years in trade, selling its assets in 1988. I wasn't able to find out whether the Core remote was a commercial success. Don't forget to come back next week for the next part of What If Woz Made Apple Computers. Or if it's already next week, the next part should be up here on your screens right now. If you've enjoyed this video series, then don't forget to like and subscribe to Al's Geek Lab.